Welcome to the ICU Podcast, where we explore the vestibular experience through conversations between patients and the health professionals who care for them.
During this podcast, we invite patients to share their stories and healthcare professionals to ask questions so they are equipped to better care for and truly see the invisible challenges faced by their patients. I'm Kimberly Warner.
And I'm Cynthia Ryan, and we are your hosts on this journey of discovery.
Hello, ICU listeners and vestibular community. This is your co-host, Kimberly, and I'm announcing that because today I'm actually your guest and not your co-host. This is kind of a special little episode where we are going to be discussing something that is very near and dear to my heart. I'll get into that, but as many of you know, I developed Mal de Débarquement Syndrome in 2015, plunging me into a difficult and disorienting chapter of my life. And for over 2 years, I lived in complete uncertainty, trying to make sense of what in the world was happening to my brain, while also grappling with a profound isolation. Those were some really dark times, and I know many of you have faced those yourselves. So complicating this, I was also navigating a deeply personal upheaval, shocking DNA test results that totally shattered my identity as a 40-year-old woman. By the summer of 2018, I was still without a diagnosis, lost career, and an abundance of unstructured time. So I found myself sitting down at my husband's computer, and out of desperation, I just started writing everything, trying to understand what had just happened to me. So fast forward to today, and that collection of words, once a quiet effort to process my pain and confusion, has grown into something so much larger and is now being published by the incredible team at Empress Editions. And so we are here today to explore the power of storytelling and the profound impact it can have on making sense of our lives. Our guest today is a memoir coach. And while you don't have to consider yourself a writer to gain something valuable from this conversation, we'll delve into the stories that shape us, how we find meaning in them, and the transformative potential of sharing these stories with others. So really excited about this today. Thank you, Cynthia, for letting me be a guest today.
This is fun, of course. Thank you, Kimberly. Well, most of you know Kimberly Warner, our co-host here on ICU, but I want to give you a little bit more of a deep dive into some of her background as a film producer, a film director, producer, author, and a medical school dropout who traded prescriptions for cameras in pursuit of narrative medicine, which is what we do here on ICU. She founded Unfixed Media in 2019 to share stories of people living with chronic or rare conditions and how adversity can broaden our definition of what it means to live a, quote, good life. Her experiences with Mal de Débarquement Syndrome, or MdDS, have led to Kimberly's larger advocacy role within the chronic illness community, where she writes and speaks about her own patient experience. She's a member of the Global Advocacy Alliance, the PPAA, or Patient and Physician Advocacy Alliance. She's a visiting faculty member with Global Genes and helped create a medical school certificate course called Course for Clinical Confidence. She's also on the editorial board of the Journal of Health Design and is a VITA ambassador. When Kimberly isn't nurturing the many facets of Unfixed, she works a small, sustainable homestead with her husband, David, in rural Oregon, very near to VITA. And her forthcoming memoir, Unfixed, will be released October 14th of this year, 2025, through Empress Editions. Kimberly, take it away.
Well, let me introduce you to Christine Wolfe. I actually met her about a year ago, special serendipity that we had. So it's really fun to have her with us today. She is a trauma-informed memoir coach, developmental editor, and the traditionally published co-author of Politics, Partnership, and Power, a biography about one of the first 50 women to serve in the United States Congress. A longtime resident of Evanston, Illinois, she runs a workspace for women writers and teaches about writing and entrepreneurship at Northwestern University. An award-winning journalist and live storyteller, Christine regularly leads workshops and retreats centered around the science-backed benefits of expressive writing for emotional healing. Her popular Substack newsletter, Writer's Haven by Christine Wolfe, models vulnerable writing and encourages literary citizenship by spotlighting writers of all levels and genres. Christine is currently at work on her own memoir called Training Grounds about sisterhood, lost, and found. Ooh, that's exciting. I can't wait to read it. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited for your book to come out and just to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
We're excited to have you here also. And I know that we were talking just before we started about how many people in the vestibular community end up sharing their story as a way to educate others about their experience, both in short and long form. So I know that what we're talking about today is going to have a lot of impact on a lot of people who want to share their story and are too scared or intimidated or just to get started. So, Kimberly, like I said, many people in the audience already know you and may already know your vestibular story, but can you just share that with us in a nutshell and how that kind of brought you to here where we are today?
Yeah, I'll try to abbreviate it as much as possible because, like you said, I think a lot of people know, but it started in 2015 after a succession of events. One of them was a bicycle accident, which sort of complicated and prolonged the diagnostic period because at first it was thought to be a concussion. But at the same time, this paternity result came through. And so I was having this nervous breakdown, if that's a word, that we can still use today, because really what was happening to me was the foundation of my understanding of myself was falling apart through months of bed rest, relearning to walk, suddenly feeling dizzy as I re-entered the world, and then all of a sudden realizing that the father that raised me and I adored was not my father. And so I lost everything for a period of time. And then the dizziness just exacerbated that period. And without a diagnosis, so that was 2015, I literally didn't have a diagnosis until 2020, thanks to the pandemic, because I was finally able to get a hold of one of the renowned neurologists that could do telehealth at that period of time. And so I had given up at that point. I think around 2018, I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I can't, I don't have any money left. I can't keep pursuing anything. So it was a long, protracted period of just depression, sadness, isolation, confusion. And I found Vita. And that was sort of the beginning. I was still really dizzy. And I'm not going to swear on this, but I was dizzy when I found you guys, and I still was desperate to find a cure, but I slowly started to find others that were, first experiencing what I was experiencing because I thought I had lost my mind, and then realizing that there were tools that could help me along the way, and finally a diagnosis and medication. So I'm still dizzy here today, but I feel truly that my brain has adapted to the dizziness, so it doesn't spiral me anymore. Most days it's pretty manageable, but it's still 100% there 24/7. I just kind of just don't mind it like I used to. And I truly think that's kind of a rewiring of my nervous system and how it responds to the quote unquote threat. So that brings me to today, with so many things in between that I didn't talk about.
Hopefully we'll get into those as you talk about your memoir writing experience.
Yeah. So let's bring Christine into the conversation, since we are talking about memoir. How did your love for teaching memoir, and I love trauma-informed memoir. I'm not even sure, let's explain what that is. How did that begin for you?
Thank you for asking that question, because having it has really forced me to go back and look at my whole journey, which has been semi-recent. I started out of college, I worked in advertising, and I did that for 10 years. And for 10 years after that, I was an educator. I got a master's in teaching, but I'd always been pulled to writing. There was always an urge, but I wasn't kind of formally trained as a journalist or academically. So it was just always an inner passion. But I think the path for me to become a trauma-informed memoir coach really started back in childhood. I went through, like so many of us, unfortunately, I went through a series of traumas, right? A parent's divorce. I had a parent who struggled with alcohol use disorder. And then in my 20s, I was in an Amtrak crash. There was a collision where our train hit a propane truck, and the truck driver was killed and several people were critically injured, but I walked away physically fine and intact. But what I didn't realize at the time, and this was in 1993, was I had suffered massive trauma from that experience. I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I didn't know how to process that experience. So I just, walked around, soldiered on, carried on, didn't look back, and really just tried to, move forward. But I had this sort of simmering unease inside of me. It felt very destabilizing, but I didn't have language for it, and I certainly didn't know who to even talk to about it. I, if anything, felt like I should be grateful. So that approach of staying quiet just wasn't sustainable, because life went on, and more events in my life went on, good and bad. But when, additional distressful events happened, it's like a balloon in water. You can only hold it down for so long, and then it just kind of pops up. And when you talk about, a nervous breakdown, I really look at what I went through as, people would say that I went through a nervous breakdown, but what I really call it is a breakthrough. Because when some more kind of intense traumatic events happened to me, my marriage was falling apart, probably in part because I hadn't resolved or dealt with a lot of my past traumas, as well as I had a child who was really ill. All of this sort of converged, and I had a wonderful therapist who pulled me aside and said, you really need to take care of yourself and acquire some tools to help you get through what was sure to be a really intense time. And so I went to a partial hospitalization program for a month, and then an intensive outpatient program for another month. And in doing that, I learned cognitive behavioral therapy, and I learned words to use, and I learned how to listen to my body and my feelings, which I really never been trained or this was just all new to me. And so newly equipped with these skills, I turned to writing because I needed to express to myself how grateful I was to kind of have gotten through yet another, I would say, collision of a bunch of kind of awful things. And fast forward, I had a trauma therapist who taught me EMDR, which really kind of helped me settle a lot of my unresolved trauma and emotions. And then the pandemic happened. And in that time, just before the pandemic happened, I had created a website. I was getting ready. I was still working on this political biography. And I thought, in advance of this book coming out, I should have a website so that people could find me and my book. But on the contact page of my website, I just listed all the kinds of writing that I knew, things that I didn't do. I mean, every kind of writing, speech writing, eulogy writing, helping people with their dissertations, any way to connect with people. We were all so lonely and detached during the pandemic. And one of the things I wrote down was memoir writing. And I didn't suggest that I knew how to do all these things. I said, if you need help with any of these things, I'll connect you to the right people. And I started to get people reaching out to me during that pandemic with either a page of writing or a chapter or a whole book that they'd written and never knew what to do with. And they were asking for feedback. And I said, I'm not trained in how to do this. And they said, no, but just, go ahead and give me feedback. And I should just add that before the pandemic, I'd been slowly building a writing career, not only, with this book writing, but I had been a columnist, a weekly opinion columnist with the Chicago Tribune, and I'd blogged for a while. So I had established a little bit of an identity as somebody who had opinions on life and on writing. And so it was just sort of like things were kind of falling into place, and I wasn't even looking I didn't have a plan. It just sort of happened. And what I found was that every single person who reached out to me had at least one traumatic event. And they often said, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to write about it. I don't know what the publishing world looks like these days. I know that I have an important story to tell, but I need help in navigating this. So the end of this long explanation of how I got to where I am is that when people repeatedly ask me the same questions about how do I do this, I started researching. I started reaching out to New York Times bestselling memoirists and writing coaches and some of the wonderful people in my own writing community, and just asking questions about how do I help people. So through a lot of just inquiry and curiosity, I guess, I just started building this level of confidence of how to help people as much as I could. And when it was beyond my scope, then I would refer them to, therapists or programs or people who were far more equipped to handle some of their issues. But it built slowly over time. And now, I have multiple authors who've been published, and I've always loved personal narrative and stories of resilience and overcoming hardship. And so it sort of happened organically, but the pandemic really boosted things a lot and forced people to come together. Yeah.
I love it when life it's like it just sort of puts you where you need to be. And the agenda is just sort of secondary, and you just respond to the call, and that's what you did.
Exactly.
Well, and it sounds like so many people were coming to you asking for help with this particular thing. There is a great need of people wanting to write memoirs about themselves and some trauma in their life. And also, what I want to call out is, you were talking about some of the trauma that you experienced, and you, Kimberly, as well as your vestibular experience. But I just want to speak to the people in our audience, most of which are vestibular patients, that being a vestibular patient is a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Going through the process of having to fight to get a diagnosis, of people not believing that what you're saying is your real experience, of thinking that you are making it up, of being diminished, of losing your job, of losing relationships. Those are all traumas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, telling your vestibular story isn't just about your symptoms, or even the process of finding a doctor. It's about your entire experience.
Oh, that's so well said, Cynthia. And I mean, trauma down to the most inescapable one, which is the experience of your body, where suddenly you're like, I can't make this stop. And so, there's the term medical PTSD, but I almost want to call it like bodily PTSD, because it's like this, how am I supposed to make this stop? It doesn't stop. And so there's just an assault that is so unnerving and so destabilizing.
May I add to that too? I completely agree with you, Kimberly, that the point about the vestibular community and the trauma, while I don't have a vestibular disorder, I I have had my own journey with trigeminal neuralgia, which took quite a long time to get to that diagnosis. And leading up to that, quite a number of times, people, saying that I was whatever it was, and maybe some of your listeners can relate, too sensitive, too much, too emotional, too dramatic, right? And when there's no sense of order or control, our emotions just feel so big. And what I hadn't really realized was the trauma of that journey until after I got through it and found a diagnosis, and then looked back and realized, oh my gosh, that was medical trauma, and it was sustained. And so just to maybe put a quick little framework around trauma, trauma is at its core, you think of the 3 E's, right? It's an event that happens. It's how you experienced it, and you may or may not have a negative experience or a lasting negative experience. It might be very upsetting, but you kind of get past it. But that 3rd E is the effect. And if the effect is one that is long lasting and adverse, then that's really what makes it traumatic. And so what I've found with so many writers is this aha moment of, oh my gosh, what I went through is technically trauma. And it's this light bulb that goes off. And while it's frustrating and upsetting to name it, it's also a massive relief for people to realize, they weren't just making things up or being too much. It's the labeling has been really hard for so many people like you and so many.
It's so validating.
And people may not recognize it as they're going through it. It may come to them at another time. Just calling out. I'm sorry, everybody. Right. My cat wants to say hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi. I thought I saw him cruising around the back.
I think we can all relate to the pets interrupting the podcast.
Absolutely. Kimberly, you're all welcome.
Kimberly, you started telling stories way before you decided to write your memoir. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you got into that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was just thinking about this today. I don't know if you subscribe to Maria Popova, the Marginalian, but she just sent something out today and was talking about her love of words and I'm just going to read this because it was so beautiful. She said, "It is in words that we narrate the events of our lives inside the lonely bone cave of the mind in order to make sense of what is happening and inscribe it into the ledger of memory, on the pages of which the story of the self emerges." And I wrote that down because for me, actually, storytelling wasn't with words prior to, I was dabble here and there, whatever, but the image, both still and motion, was the language that I found. I wasn't a very verbal child. I was the quiet one, sitting under the table looking at how people's shoes moved back and forth. And my world was put together mostly through composition. And so when I discovered photography after I dropped out of school, that quickly snowballed into more of a storytelling type of photography. I knew I wasn't into the fashion and all of that stuff. It was more about like, what do these images evoke? And then, so that led into more of the filmmaking storytelling. My first short film actually had no dialogue. So to me, words felt almost like, that's too scary because it put a box. It was like too much, too literal for me, and I wanted to leave things open to interpretation. So while I had between age 30 and 40, a big career of doing photography and film, words were still secondary to me, even though they started to grow into more dialogue and all of that stuff with screenplays, but it was secondary. I was thrilled to peel that onion back and come back to the purity of word. Because for me, at that point of time when I started writing the memoir, it was purely for myself. This wasn't like at all something I was doing for anybody else. I was trying to make my experience real. because at that point I still was probably pretty disembodied from what had just happened to me over a period of, at that point, 4 years. So I was like trying to make my own experience real, and words helped me get there.
Kimberly, I through Unfixed and through the Life for Balance Chronicles with Vita, you were telling other people's story. So what was that process like? You were talking about how you morphed from photography and film, and I'm going to, interject into there into storytelling for people with chronic illness, but about someone else, someone telling someone else's story. So what was that process like? What did you learn through telling other people's story?
Oh my goodness. I learned that the resilience of the human spirit is freaking gorgeous. Over and over and over again, from all sides of the political spectrum, all different ages, genders, experiences. I mean, everybody that came through the Life Rebalance Chronicles or through the Unfixed projects, it was like I just was brought to tears by each one of them and how gutted they were. And there was I think I was learning in myself a confidence that I could hold a space for them, and probably was sort of on the side doing that for myself, because I really needed to do that for myself, but I didn't know how to. So I think it started by doing it for others, and falling in love with them. And then maybe by default, sort of leaning into like, oh, okay, I'm okay too. So it really, they were teachers. They were all teachers for me to kind of lean into my own story more, and to see that there is there can be beauty held right alongside pain, and that suffering and joy can live alongside each other. All of these opposites that prior to this experience, I felt I was very much a black and white, like happiness means this. And I didn't have a lot of room for discomfort and pain and suffering and grief and all of that. And now that's the whole spectrum. And I learned that from all of those beautiful subjects.
Wow.
I know no one ever asked me that before. So thanks, Cynthia. That was a cool question.
I love that too. Can I just add to that? In a very big way, I didn't even connect it until you said it, Kimberly. So Cynthia, thank you for prompting the question, which then got us here. I started out my whole career as a memoir coach by wanting to write my own memoir, and I didn't really know how to do it. And so I had been kind of learning through my clients' experiences what struggles they had and what roadblocks they were facing. And I felt like I was constantly trying to clear the path for them, and gathering more tools for myself as well. Learning alongside of them, constantly saying, I'm really new at this. You sure you want me to do this? And they were just all so happy to find somebody to listen to them. But that distance that you had, Kimberly, is just so, I think, super helpful for anybody who's starting out with a big, daunting project or goal or task. I know that the first time I wrote about that train accident that I'd been in, I was at the Tribune, and my editor gave me a really quick turnaround of a deadline. And he just said something like, give me, I don't even know what the word count was, give me 500, 750 words on something by tomorrow. And I didn't have anything that day prepared. So I realized that the anniversary of the crash was coming within that week, I think. So I wrote about that event, but from almost a third person point of view. And I just wrote the facts. I didn't write even how I felt. I just wrote the data. And I kept a distance, which allowed me not to re-traumatize myself necessarily. I didn't go too deep. I just sort of skimmed the surface of how how hot was the explosion, when a propane, like I did a little research. I found out how cold the air temperature was that day. I figured out from research online how many people were on the train. I'd never known that before. What the name of the conductor was, what the name of the engineer was, all of these things. And I started to build a story, but only loosely and from a distance. And that gave me the confidence to then go deeper later. So it was these layers of attempts at it. So
I'm curious. That's there's probably a lot of these layers that you work with your clients, and I'm wondering about the science behind this type of writing, whether it's, like you said, starting out just very third person, getting the facts down, moving more into the more expressive, emotional aspects of that. Like, what are some of the science-backed benefits of this?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. So this one approach that I work with primarily, and it's so successful and it's got science behind it, which I love, is called expressive writing. And so I teach a course and some workshops, and I've led a few retreats called Expressive Writing for Emotional Healing. And expressive writing is actually a practice that was created by Dr. James Pennebaker in 1986. So it's been around for a while. And he was really curious about basically why keeping secrets makes us sick. He was fascinated. He is a social psychologist, and he was really interested in illness and the impact that secrets have on making us sick, keeping us sick. So he created a prompt for some subjects, and this prompt was, please write about the most difficult, traumatic, upsetting, distressing event of your life. Write about it for 15 or 20 minutes. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about spelling. Don't show it to anybody. Just please write for 15 or 20 minutes. And he had them do it for 4 days in a row. And it was kind of a time-limited deep dive into something that's hard and usually unspoken. And in the process of doing that, what he discovered through research that has been replicated over and over and over again, this wasn't a one-off thing, is that he had a control group of people who just wrote about superficial things. And then he had another group of people who wrote about a hard thing but didn't add any of their feelings about what happened. But that third group, where they wrote about the difficult thing and they wrote the reflections on how that difficult circumstance impacted them, how they felt about it, that group who combined both the event and the feelings, they went on to demonstrate improved physical health, improved emotional health, improved interpersonal health. And I mean, I could go on and on about, just what some of those things look like. But just for instance, right, these subjects that Dr. Pennebaker followed, they were testing their blood, they were testing their heart rate, they were wearing monitors that would capture little recordings of their voices when they were in social situations. And in that situation, those individuals would laugh more, yawn more, which shows that they were more relaxed. They would spend more time with other people. They would have, engaging relationships. These individuals would have fewer stress-related visits to the doctor and to therapists. Their blood pressure was lower, improved lung function, increased immunity, fewer depressive symptoms. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's a lot of theory about why releasing this, these secrets that we hold, or these kind of like shameful feelings, and putting them into a very safe container that, again, does not need to be shared. But once you get those sort of jumbled, disordered, regretful, looping feelings out of your brain and onto the page, or frankly, even if you write with your finger in the air, right? If you're on a plane and you're feeling like you need to do this and you just need to get it out, that counts as writing. you're not writing on paper, but you're writing in the air. It's the idea of taking thoughts, which we all have, and especially if they're intrusive thoughts or thoughts that we're working really hard to suppress. If we take those thoughts and we convert them into language, doesn't matter what language you speak, you do that, and and you add your feelings to it. You're using both sides of your brain. Your emotional and your linguistic kind of sides are working in harmony to just release a bit of the burden of your working memory. You can then sleep better. And if you sleep better, so much of life is more manageable. And speaking as a postmenopausal woman, I can absolutely say that's true. And so, all of these benefits were coming from this, and it was just sort of stumbled upon. So what I do is, when people have some big emotions or big events, especially traumatic events, that they know that they have come through, and they want to share how they did it, or just, let the world know about, the relief that they have, but they don't know how to put this into words. I often say, start with expressive writing. Do it for 20 minutes a day. Even if it's not 20 minutes, do it sometimes for 5 minutes a day, and do it over the course of 3 or 4 days. What happens is, maybe the first time you write, you're just going to dump. You're just going to unload. And that's fine. That you need to do that. You just need to make bullet points maybe of what happened, or scratch the surface. The next day when you come back to it, you might find that you have a different perspective, or that you've gotten the dump out and now you can sort of go a little bit deeper. Maybe you'll come back the second day or the third day and write it from the perspective of somebody else who was at that same event. Or maybe you come at it with the perspective of your child self looking at what you went through and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you knew how to handle that. Even though it was really scary, I'm, just so amazed that whatever it is, right? But if you come at it from different perspectives, or if you speak multiple languages, write from a different language, all of these kind of approaches help your brain to just offload. And then you're unburdened and you're creating language about these events rather than them just sort of rattling around in your brain and taking up space and energy.
Yeah.
Wow.
It sounds like self-reflection combined with writing, we could call it journaling, is a form of therapy in and of itself. At Kimberly, I wanted to use that to talk to you about your process of writing about you. We talked about you telling other people's story, and for a long time you'd been thinking about your own story. When did you decide to write a memoir?
Well, like I touched on earlier, it was not, I never would have said, I'm writing a memoir. It was like, I have a poor memory, and I had enough people. There was so many weird serendipitous things that were happening around the paternity stuff, and beautiful moments and all that stuff, that I just thought, people are telling me I need to write these down because I'm going to forget them. And lo and behold, I do, So part of it was just, I need to write all this down. Also, I was very isolated and trying to understand what was happening to me. So it was a process of, like Christine was saying, with journaling and expressive writing. The actual sharing of that and I finished it, I put it on my desktop, and I just left it there. I didn't share it with anybody for years. And then in 2022, I thought, gosh, there was some insights in there that maybe I'd like to share with my mom, and a little bit of the paternity family, the new family that I had grown a relationship with. And so I shared it with my mom and my aunt and my brother, and they read it and said, you got to share this with more people. And it was kind of that very slow gestation period of realizing that there's personal events in here, but it's also universal. And that maybe there were some things that other people would glean from this. And so when I started to feel a little bit more of the universal in this, I thought, well, I'll put it up on Substack and serialize it. again, not to share as a memoir, but to just make it accessible for more of the family members and the friends that were curious about what the hell happened to Kimberly? Where'd she go? So it was never a decision to write a memoir. It really became, it was a slow unfolding, but I have to say, through serializing it on Substack and discovering angels like Christine and people all over the globe that are engaged, generous readers and writers, I had no clue. The community of love over there was phenomenal. And I just posted a chapter every Sunday, and that was where the encouragement kept growing and growing and growing. And I thought, maybe this is something to share. So, and that was a 2-year process of just sharing on Sundays. And then one of those readers has an amazing publication for midlife women, run by midlife women, for midlife women. And she approached me and said, would you like to be published? So all of this was organic. And I needed it to be that way too, because to me, this was not ever about me. I mean, even though it's a memoir, it really was more of trying to understand the sequence of events and trying to heal them inside my own heart. And then, as Christine so beautifully said earlier, that you start to feel how these stories are carried in all of us, that many of us have trauma, and many of us are looking for ways to heal and to shine that light so that others can find it. So, yeah. And I'll have to say, though, Cynthia, and this has been coming up for me because Christine, you're talking about all these healing benefits of writing, and I'll just jump in, and because I know vestibular patients are sitting there going, how the hell do I do that? Because staring at a screen makes me sick. So I want to add that no, that was not easy. And I was doing it out of desperation, and I was writing like 10-minute chunks at a time on my husband's computer, and then I'd lay down on the floor. And then I got prism glasses and was hopeful that would help, and they didn't help. And then I lay on the floor. So it was a very slow, organic process. And I would write in a journal a lot, away from the screen. And so it can be done, I want to say, because I don't want to all of a sudden eliminate this whole beautiful audience of writers that want to share their story who are like, well, that's not me because I can't look at a screen. I just want to say I was that person 100%. And so you have to listen to your body and find out what works for you. And sometimes it's literally 10 minutes a day. And that, or writing notes, on your dimmed phone screen or, just speaking into your phone. So
that's what I was going to ask is, Christine, you were talking about just the process of writing, even if you're using your finger and writing in the air, there's something to that. But for those people who do have a difficult time with the visual part of, working on a computer, what about, using AI tools, verbal note takers?
Right. There's never been a better time to dive into memoir writing. I sincerely mean that, because I've seen clients do voice to text. I mean, let's just name one really important thing here, because a lot of people wonder, right? Like, if I have an important story, but I'm not a writer, or I've never really been good at writing. I hear that all the time. Can I still do it? Can I still do it? Yes, you absolutely can. Not only with AI, which is a whole big, sometimes complicated conversation, right? About which platforms are best and all of these copyright things. But, for the purposes of getting your story down and just for yourself, I have seen, people take their smartphone and just talk into it and let the story kind of appear there, and they'll go back to it later. Whatever format you use, the thing that I think Kimberly touched upon most importantly is that this really is, going into this, being prepared for it to be a longer process. That was the thing that just blew me away when I first stepped into being a professional writer before I ever even did memoir writing. I sat at a conference one time and a panel of writers got up and somebody asked the question, so how long did it take you to write your first book? And this woman answered very honestly. She said, let's see, 5, 6, 7 years. 7 years. And my jaw dropped. I thought, what am I doing? What? And then I realized through being in this, on this journey, that good writing really happens slowly. And so chipping away at it a few times, a week even, is enough. And it is a marathon mentality of just, doing a little bit by bit by bit, and you get better at it. So don't be afraid of the format that is coming out, or especially the time it takes, because it'll take as long as it takes, and it'll be worthwhile.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And don't even think of it as a memoir. I mean, I don't think I would have ever done it if I said I'm writing a memoir. That would have been so paralyzing. I think of it as a nurturing activity.
Mm-hmm. And you also said something really important too, Kimberly, and that is that while you were doing this, while you were writing, it really wasn't about you, or it wasn't for you. It was for the benefit of others to understand what had happened to you. And that is the crux of memoir, because so many people kind of shy away from memoir, and they think, oh, I'm not going to write a book about myself. I'm not looking to be in the limelight. I don't like the attention. Da, 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 da. We write memoir about our experience, but it is for the benefit of others to understand how we overcame, how we navigated, how we figured things out or didn't figure things out. But it is, it's about us, but it is for the reader. So if you think about who it can benefit, especially if there's somebody else who's going through, the nightmare of, just the maze of medical this and that, and just the dead ends. If you have something that can offer hope or offer some kind of perspective, that's for the reader, and that's really important to help pull you through when you're feeling like, what am I doing? How far am I getting in this?
Absolutely.
And everybody has a different perspective. I mean, there might be, one person might have written a book about their experience with Meniere's, but another person's experience is going to be different. Their story is going to be different, and there's value in all of it.
Exactly.
Kimberly, I know that your memoir and your story it's about your vestibular experience, and granted, some people do they hesitate to talk about their own medical stories for various reasons. I have people who are very conscientious about not wanting to share their medical story because they don't want their employer to think that they are not qualified for their job, for example. But you had other very personal things to share in your story. Did how did that feel, sharing that level of intimacy, and how did you work through the discomfort of sharing the intimate details of your personal life?
Well, I'm kind of an open book. I've always been, even though I've been nonverbal, I'm also not like emotionally wise. It's like, maybe it's the Wisconsin girl in me, but there's not a lot. I did brush my hair before here, but I'm usually not very polished. So for me, it wasn't, I don't think I ever really had a like, oh gosh, do I share what I did when I was 21? But I did have to think about the other people that were part of the story. And so that was where I'm just wanting to be extra sensitive to the people that I love. And I know that some memoirists, Christine, you would probably have more to say about this, but some memoirists are like, don't edit, just write and, let the cards fall. And that's an approach. For me, the approach was more to just hold everybody up. We all have dark sides, we all have light sides. And I really didn't want to malign anybody in this story. And it was also healing for me to really find the light of all of these secrets that were part of my childhood, and and that was healing for me. So that was part of what I needed. So that was probably where most of the discomfort came, Cynthia, was just having, and to be honest, even when I found out that the book was going to be published, I didn't even reply to Alyssa, the publisher. I immediately emailed my paternal family and the kind of the matriarch and the patriarch of that family. And I said, this just happened. How do you feel about it? And if you don't want this, please let me know and I'll never mention it again. And they just, replied very quickly and were, just emojis and happiness and all of that. So it was not a big deal. But I just wanted to first and foremost make sure that there was never any intention for this to expose a family that has become very near and dear to my heart over the last years. And so there were a lot of those conversations, and I'll probably even change some names in the memoir as I go through the edit phase as well to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Christine, how do you coach your clients on sharing the intimate details?
Oh, that's usually one of the biggest kind of obstacles for anybody starting out, or even in the midst of writing a memoir, is how is this going to land with others? And every fear is mentioned, right? Am I going to get sued? Is somebody going to hate me? Will I be disowned? Will I be judged? There's so much that Kimberly just touched on that I commend you for, and that is when your intention is solid and coming from a place of wanting to tell your story for the benefit of others, that often kind of levels things. And I can tell right away if a writer is writing out of a place of bitterness, revenge, anger, and that comes through not only to me as a coach, but readers are smart and they will know, and they will not respond well if they feel like they're being, used almost as pawns in somebody's get back at you kind of an approach. So when the intentions are solid, and when you're writing about your own experience and not trying to write on behalf of what you think somebody else thought, or if somebody was acting poorly, you don't have to spell out all the reflections that you have about what an absolute jerk they were, or, including doctors, right? Who, this absolutely tracks with your listeners and kind of the frustrations that they have felt. But if you are writing from a place where you describe your own experience and perhaps the actions that others took, readers will figure out if somebody was being a jerk, and they will come to their own conclusions, or they'll conclude that somebody was being neglectful or dismissive or whatever it is. So trust the readers to come to their own conclusions, and that takes you off the hook of being the master of all emotions. You only have to focus on your own experience. And if other people, of course, we're human beings, if other people come into play, being mindful of them and how it might come off is, of course, going to play into your mind. But when drafting, the advice that I always give is write the story as it happened, with the real names, with the actual events, with your true feelings. Don't sugarcoat it, because this is a draft that is just for you, kind of like expressive writing. And then you can decide if you want to absolutely slash entire chapters or characters. And there is actually a huge healing feeling that comes from deciding, for instance, like, I am not even going to give this, jerk of a family member or doctor any airtime. I'm going to keep them out of it. That is a sense of control that you have, but it's also a very relieving feeling to get it down on paper and make that choice, like get it out of your senses and then make the call.
That's
So,
huge. I love that. I can
yeah,
see how someone might just go, oh, and now you don't have to be part of my story anymore.
right. I am changing the narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have, let's say, somebody who has had horrific medical trauma, never really thinks they'll ever get past it, and let's say it was caused by a doctor or somebody's, medical interventions or lack thereof. Um, the idea of writing them out of your story or writing them out of the story that the public sees can be super gratifying and empowering and healing. Yeah. So I think I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a theme that we're discovering is the healing power of writing, of telling your story.
Mhm.
Gives you more. It's therapeutic. It gives you more control of the narrative.
Mhm.
I hope that that is a message that everybody is hearing. Whether and also what I heard you say is, this is a draft. This isn't, when you're writing, when you're writing, just get it out. This isn't what's going to go up on the internet that everybody's going to see right away. It's really,
Yeah.
it's a process.
And sometimes people will put at the top of the page draft, or somewhere they'll name their document draft only, or they'll whatever tricks you need to convince yourself that this is for my eyes only, do it. The other thing, the
But
best,
for my eyes only, if
yeah.
that helps you.
And the honestly, regarding this issue of how others might perceive this and maybe make trouble for us, right? I mean, the obvious thing to keep in mind is that before this book ever goes to publication, you can very well hire a publishing attorney to take a look at things. But before you even worry about that sort of stuff, the best advice I ever got, I was at a writing conference and I stood in front of this panel of, they were, best-selling memoirists, and I had a legit question from my own heart because I'm working on my own memoir, right? And I have been specifically told by somebody not to write about an aspect of my story. They looked me in the eye, pointed their finger, and literally said, "You will not write about this subject matter." And I was 50 years old at the time when this happened, and I just was so stunned. Like, how is this possible? And so I never forgot that. And this is somebody that I care about. And so I stood in front of this panel of memoirists as not only a memoir writer, but also as a coach giving advice. And I asked them, I said, what would you say to somebody who's up against this kind of a daunting demand, right? That somebody is telling a writer, you don't have permission to discuss something that happened to you, but is nobody's business. And the wonderful response that I got was, you need to ask yourself two questions. One is, who am I protecting by staying quiet about something and keeping a secret? Who am I protecting? And also, who am I harming by staying quiet? So in my situation, the person I'm protecting is that person who got in my face. And if I stay quiet, then I'm keeping them happy. I'm protecting them from dealing with a real situation that's hard and distressful, and maybe they're not equipped to handle that. But that's their issue and that's their struggle. It's not my responsibility to kind of help them or hold them through that, right? We can have a conversation about helping them through that, and I can adjust my language to maybe make it more palatable, but my story is my story. The other question is, who am I harming by not talking? Obviously, I'm harming myself if I don't let my true story be heard. I'm hurting myself. We know from the evidence, I'm hurting myself physically, emotionally, interpersonally by keeping secrets. And I'm also, frankly, hurting potential readers who might be dealing with the same thing that I'm dealing with, who feel very alone, who might be looking for guidance. And if I'm kind of keeping this quiet, when I have some experience or a little bit of perspective that might give them a sense of connection, then one could say that I'm harming these people that I'm leaving out. So that helped me kind of feel better about that, what I call kind of a threat, because that's an awful position to be put into. And when I realized, after lots of consideration and therapy, it's we are allowed to tell our stories, and some of our stories are really hard to hear. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be told.
Yeah. And Christine, I feel like I'm listening to this, and it's like I can feel the vestibular patients all listening, going, okay, I have a story to tell, but I'm not a writer. Like, you're so motivating and inspiring to listen to. And I want to encourage those that are listening that all have powerful stories, to step into this. But what do you tell them if they're like, I want to do this, but I'm not a writer?
It's so wonderful when somebody has that desire to write and they don't know where to begin, and it's wonderful to be able to give them a little encouragement, right? That I will listen to somebody's story first and foremost. I will never take their writing up front and decide if I want to work with them. I listen to their story, and hear it as it happened to them. And after I've heard it, then I know what they're trying to say. Because sometimes the words out here and the words on the page may not align, right? So my job is to help make sure that the words on the page align. And I try to help them put aside all of the imposter syndrome things about who am I to write this story, and I don't have the experience, and I've only had a year of this diagnosis, and I'm not really all the things. Once I understand the writer and their struggles, and we've built some trust, then I describe how accountability looks, because that's always so important. I don't know if that was the way for you, Kimberly, if you had any accountability, or if this was a solitary, I'm just going to put this out. I don't know if you told your husband, even not showing him, but just telling him, like, I'm going to go and write for a while. But having accountability or a deadline is often really motivating, so I can be that person for somebody. But most of all, what I encourage them to do, no matter what, is understand what expressive writing is, so you can sort of do that. It's free. You can stop it if you don't like it, right? It's accessible. You don't have to have somebody guiding you to do it. But if you know you have a story and you know that you're ready, create a timeline of what it is that you want to tell. Like, try to put a beginning, middle, and an end. Even just scrape it together on a piece of paper loosely with Post-its or something. Just try to figure out where your story starts and where it ends, and what the biggest turning point or crisis or conflict was in the middle. And then from there, you just sort of keep building out details and fill in things that kind of string it all together. I mean, that's the very loose way of saying it, but I mean, everybody's story is important. It's just a matter of how do you hang it all together in a way that's rewarding and satisfying for a reader. And so you've always got to keep the reader in mind.
Yeah. Kimberly, do you have any final words of wisdom to the vestibular patients who are listening today about if they want to tell their story, and they're not sure how to get started, what they should do?
Yes. I would say, first of all, my hope with what I wrote is that I reach anyone who, which is all of us, who has experienced loss and discovered some sort of unique resilience within that loss, or is searching for that unique resilience within the loss, and finding something that feels very true to themselves. And I want to reach those that are specifically within the vestibular world, those that are seeking or finding peace within the storm. And that's a very physical experience for us. But I know that that's also metaphorical for so much of humanity in current times, especially. How do we find peace within the storm? And so to me, I think you all have a unique way that you're going to approach this. And there are as many ways up the mountain as there are human beings. And like Christina said, you don't know if, what is that quote? That your story is a roadmap for someone else, like, or your trauma is a roadmap. You don't know, and it might be. And so write it and share it, so that somebody might find that and find their way as well.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you both so much for sharing so vulnerably and giving so much really useful knowledge and expertise to the people listening today. And I hope that those of you who have thought about sharing your story will take that first step and just start writing it. Remember, you don't have to share it. You don't have to publish it, but just start writing it and see how you feel.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for another wonderful episode of ICU.
Thank you both so much.
And I forgot to mention that my memoir is actually available for pre-order now. You can find it on Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble. And the title again is Unfixed, a memoir of family, mystery, and the currents that carry you home. And you can also order that straight through the publisher at empresseditions.net/unfixed pre-order. Thank you, everyone. Your support means everything.
Thanks for tuning in to ICU this month.
We hope this conversation sparked new understanding of the vestibular journey. And for all of our patients out there, leaves you feeling just a little more heard and a little more seen. I see you.